NASA is going to the bottom of the ocean to look for alien life. But what they found down there has nothing to do with life. And yet, 13,000 feet below the surface of the Pacific, something impossible showed up in the data. This is the story of what NASA actually found at the bottom of the ocean. In 2014, a vehicle called Nereus had ventured down to the Mariana Trench back in 2009. It had already produced over a dozen publications of novel findings based on just 4 dives. But on a dive at the Kermadec Trench near New Zealand in 2014, Nereus lost contact with its mothership and disappeared. It was a $14 million project, gone in an instant. Since that day, the deepest part of the ocean has been largely closed to long-term exploration by researchers, until NASA got involved. Now, here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. After the loss of Nereus, a deep-sea biologist named Timothy Shank decided to completely rethink the approach. Shank leads the Hadal Exploration Program, known as HADEX, and his insight was simple but radical. The old model was wrong. Building one massive, expensive, powerful machine and hoping it survived the pressure was too risky. One failure and you lose everything. Shank wanted to go the other way, small, cheap, a fleet instead of a flagship. He called it the CubeSat philosophy, borrowing the term from the space industry, where tiny, affordable satellites are launched in clusters rather than relying on a single billion-dollar spacecraft. So he turned to the people who had been building small, autonomous robots for extreme environments for decades. NASA. Together, they built something called Orpheus, named after the figure from Greek mythology who ventured into the depths of Hades. Orpheus is a new class of autonomous underwater vehicle. It weighs about 550 pounds. It is roughly the size of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, shaped like a hoagie sandwich, and it costs less than $200,000 to build. Compare that to the $14 million that Nereus required. 2 identical vehicles were constructed in 2018, named Orpheus and Eurydice, after the mythological pair who had ventured through the underworld. And they carry a unique piece of heritage. The syntactic foam that provides their buoyancy, a rigid flotation material made of microscopic glass spheres embedded in epoxy resin, came from spare material originally produced for James Cameron's Deep-Sea Challenger. That is the submersible Cameron piloted to Challenger Deep in 2012, touching the deepest point on Earth. Orpheus uses cameras. The navigation system is called Visual Inertial Odometry, or XVIO, and it was developed by engineers at NASA. It works by using a system of advanced cameras and pattern-matching software, along with instruments that can precisely measure the vehicle's orientation and motion. As Orpheus travels over the seafloor, XVIO identifies features below the vehicle, things like rocks, shells, and coral, and uses them as landmarks. Think of it like remembering landmarks during a road trip. You see the gas station, you see the water tower, you know where you are. Robots do exactly the same thing. Now, this is the same fundamental technology that helped the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover land safely in Jezero crater. And now, an evolution of that technology is operating at the bottom of the ocean. Because down there, just like on Mars, there is no GPS. No satellite signal penetrates thousands of meters of water. The vehicle has to navigate by its own senses. But Orpheus does more than just avoid obstacles. It remembers. The high-resolution maps it creates are stored to memory, so when the vehicle returns to an area, it recognizes the unique distribution of features and uses them as a starting point to expand its exploration further. And when multiple Orpheus vehicles work together, maps can be shared, cross-referenced, and developed to quickly identify areas of scientific interest. Orpheus also carries sensors that can detect the chemical signatures of hydrothermal vents or low-temperature seeps. And it is equipped with environmental DNA technology, sensors that can retrieve DNA samples of organisms from the water and soil without needing to physically capture anything. The vehicle was first tested in September 2018 with the ocean exploration organization OceanX, and again in September 2019 from the research vessel Neil Armstrong. In May 2021, aboard the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, on a 2-week expedition from Cape Canaveral to Norfolk, Virginia, it completed 8 dives, covering over 24 kilometers of seafloor. It created 3-dimensional mosaics of the ocean bottom. It sensed chemical variations in the water column, including differences in oxygen content as it drove. So what does any of this have to do with NASA, with a space agency? Everything. There is a moon orbiting Jupiter called Europa. Beneath its surface, locked under a shell of ice roughly 12 kilometers thick, scientists believe there is a liquid water ocean. And at the bottom of that ocean, the pressure is estimated to be roughly equivalent to the pressure at the bottom of Earth's Hadal Zone. That is not a coincidence. That is the reason NASA is building submarines. Every dive Orpheus makes, every navigation algorithm it tests, every environmental DNA sensor it deploys is a rehearsal, not just for understanding our own planet, but for one day sending a vehicle beneath the ice of Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus to search for life in an alien ocean. The challenges are remarkably similar between the two environments. Data-constrained communication, requiring a high degree of autonomy. Total darkness, extreme pressure, harsh conditions that require enormous engineering effort to survive. You cannot send a joystick command through 12 kilometers of ice and across hundreds of millions of miles of space. The vehicle has to think for itself, make decisions, adapt to what it finds. To make the technology fit for an interplanetary voyage, engineers will have to shrink it by at least a factor of 10 from its current size. And they will need to make sure the electronics can withstand radiation bombardment in space and on those moons, which have no atmosphere to shield them. We are still several decades out from being able to send vehicles to explore the oceans of Enceladus and Europa. But the development work is happening right now, in our own ocean. And there is one more parallel that matters deeply to the scientists involved. If life exists on Europa or Enceladus, it will almost certainly not rely on sunlight. It will need a different kind of energy. And we already know that such energy exists because we have found it here on Earth, in the deepest, darkest places on the planet. In 1977, scientists discovered hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. These are cracks in the seabed, miles below the surface, where hot, mineral-rich water escapes from the Earth's interior. And around those vents, against all expectation, they found thriving ecosystems. Entire communities of organisms, microbes, shrimp, tube worms, mussels, living in total darkness, surviving not on photosynthesis, but on chemosynthesis. In chemosynthesis, microorganisms process carbon-containing molecules that seep from the seafloor to create organic material that other creatures feed on. No sunlight required. That discovery, nearly 5 decades ago, fundamentally changed our understanding of where life can exist, and it opened a door that has never closed. Before 1977, biologists assumed that all life on Earth depended, either directly or indirectly, on the sun. Photosynthesis was the engine, sunlight was the fuel. Every food chain traced back to it. The discovery of hydrothermal vent communities shattered that assumption. Here were entire ecosystems, complex and abundant, that had never seen a photon of sunlight. The energy source was the Earth itself, its internal heat, its chemistry, its geological restlessness. And if life can arise independently of sunlight on Earth, then the same principle should apply anywhere in the universe where liquid water meets rock and heat. That is the core logic behind every mission NASA has planned or proposed to the ocean moons of the outer solar system. You do not need a star, you just need geology. At one of the world's deepest undersea hydrothermal vents, in the Caribbean Sea, NASA scientists from JPL have been studying a species of shrimp called Rimicaris hybesae. These tiny creatures pile on top of each other, layer upon layer, crawling on rock chimneys that spew water heated to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the water just an inch away from those chimneys is cool enough for the shrimp to survive. The shrimp are blind, but they have thermal receptors in the backs of their heads that help them sense the heat and position themselves at the narrow boundary between scalding death and tolerable warmth. Bacteria living inside their mouths and in specially evolved gill covers produce organic matter that feeds the crustaceans. The entire system runs on chemistry, not light. The research team, led by Chris German at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, first discovered these particular vents in 2009 off the west coast of Cuba. They returned in 2012 aboard the RV Atlantis with a robotic vehicle called Jason and collected specimens from 2 hydrothermal vent fields. The Von Dam field sits at 7,500 feet. The Picard field reaches more than 16,000 feet, making it the world's deepest known vent system. And here is the strange part about the shrimp. When they crowd together in dense clusters, they feed primarily on the bacteria. But when they spread out, they turn carnivorous. They eat snails. They eat other crustaceans. And although researchers did not directly observe it, they found bits of crustacean in the shrimp's guts. The most abundant crustacean in the area by far is the shrimp itself. They appear to be cannibals. But the hydrothermal vents are only one chapter of this story. In recent years, researchers have discovered that life also thrives in other, much colder, lightless ecosystems on the deep seafloor. In places where faults in ancient sediments allow methane to seep upward from deeply buried deposits, compressed natural gas becomes trapped in a lattice of water ice crystals to form structures called gas hydrates. These methane seeps are found on continental slopes around the world, 500 to 1,000 meters beneath the waves, at pressures 50 times greater than at the surface. Around the seeps, you find mussels, clams, tube worms, shrimp, and tiny pink ice worms, just 1 to 2 inches long, that burrow directly into the mounds of methane ice. This strange, eyeless species of segmented worm was first discovered in 1977. It belongs to the same family as eyeless worms found near hydrothermal vents in the Pacific. Scientists still are not entirely sure how it feeds, though they suspect it may graze on bacteria that derive nutrition from the methane ice. And then there are the brine pools. On the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, sitting above massive salt beds formed when an ancient sea dried up during the Jurassic period more than 140 million years ago, there are actual puddles of salt water, 60 meters wide or more, 5 times saltier than the surrounding ocean. Buoyant salt rose upward through the sediments over geological time, faulting the rock so that salt, methane, and oil now seep upward to the sea floor. Only microbes can survive inside the brine pools, but mussels flourish along the edges, fed by bacteria in a symbiotic relationship that converts methane into nutrients. Without light for photosynthesis, bacteria and archaea near these cold seeps engage in chemosynthesis, converting methane and hydrogen sulfide into food that supports larger organisms. Tube worms take up hydrogen sulfide along with oxygen and provide them to bacteria living symbiotically inside their bodies. Those bacteria, in turn, produce organic carbon to nourish the worms. The whole system is a closed loop of chemical energy exchange, entirely independent of the sunday. You travel along the ocean bottom and there is nothing. Vast stretches of barren sediment. And then suddenly you reach one of these sites and it is literally teeming with life. These are the oases, and they are everywhere we have looked. The methane hydrate deposits alone are staggering in scale. Within just the 200-mile United States territorial offshore limit from North Carolina to the southern tip of Florida, Researchers have estimated that gas hydrates could cover more than 130,000 square kilometers, and they have been found on virtually every continental slope where scientists have thought to look. Some researchers have estimated that if you combined all the carbon locked inside gas hydrates with all the carbon in plants, animals, oil, and coal on the entire planet, the hydrates would account for roughly 60% of the total. These are not rare curiosities. They are a dominant feature of Earth's carbon budget, and they are covered in life. The deeper implications are hard to overstate. If Earth's seafloor supports this much life in this many different chemical environments, all independent of the sun, then the potential for similar ecosystems on other worlds begins to look not just plausible, but almost expected. But the strangest discovery is not at the bottom of the ocean. It is beneath it. In 2006, a large international research team, led by scientists from Princeton and Indiana universities and supported in part by the NASA Astrobiology Institute, announced the discovery of a microbial community living 2.8 kilometers deep in a South African gold mine near Johannesburg. The scientists had taken advantage of a water-filled fracture that was intersected during drilling. They began collecting water samples within a few days of initial flow to ensure minimum contamination, and continued drawing new samples over several months. What they found was a community of microbes living in hot groundwater inside the rock. The water itself was dated at tens of millions of years old. During that entire span of time, it had had no physical or chemical contact with the familiar surface world far above. These organisms were not feeding on sunlight. They were not feeding on anything derived from the surface biosphere. They were drawing their energy from chemical compounds, hydrogen and sulfates, produced by the slow decay of radioactive elements in the surrounding rock. The base of their food chain was a sulfate-reducing organism belonging to a group called firmicutes, and other microbes in the community appeared to subsist on products from this primary producer. This is, by any reasonable definition, an alien form of life within the Earth, completely isolated, completely independent, and it has apparently been sustaining itself for longer than the human species has existed. At around the same time, another team from the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole, led by Mitch Sogin, used new genetic analysis tools to look past the dominant microbial populations in deep-sea samples and found something else unexpected. An enormous hidden diversity of microbial life, what they called a rare biosphere. Although these organisms exist in small numbers, there is at least 100 times greater species diversity than anyone had expected. What are all these diverse organisms doing? In a sense, they are not very successful, since they are far outnumbered by more familiar species. Yet they persist. Perhaps they represent a kind of natural backup system, a reserve force that could swing into action if environmental conditions change in ways that threaten the dominant ecosystem. They could be part of life's strategy to survive even catastrophic environmental changes. A multidisciplinary team from the University of Southern California, Caltech, JPL, and several other institutions has been exploring the subsurface ecosystems of Earth through boreholes, mine shafts, sediment cores, marine vents and seeps, and deeply sourced springs. Their position is straightforward. If life exists, or ever existed, on Mars or any other planetary body in our solar system, evidence of it would most likely be found in the subsurface. The implication of all this is profound. Life does not just survive in extreme environments. It is woven into the fabric of the planet at depths and in conditions we barely imagined a few decades ago. And if it can persist for millions of years in isolated rock fractures on Earth, fueled by nothing but the slow chemistry of radioactive decay, then there is no obvious reason why similar life could not exist beneath the surface of Mars or inside the warm cores of icy moons, wherever there is rock, water, and a source of chemical energy. NASA missions have already revealed that Mars once had a surface environment more suitable for life, with liquid water and sunlight, conditions under which life may have formed and thrived billions of years ago. Perhaps the remnant of that ancient Martian life persists below the surface today, in environments analogous to this sunless sea deep inside our own planet. The brine pools on the Gulf of Mexico seafloor, for instance, are chemically similar to what ancient Martian lakes may have looked like as the planet dried and cooled, becoming more saline, more alkaline, as carbon dioxide dissolved into the water. The faults and conduits that produce hydrocarbon seeps on Earth's seafloor show that the system is open to impressive depths. There is circulation between the seafloor and the interior of the Earth that extends thousands of meters downward. Whether microbial communities can survive under those deep, hot, pressurized conditions remains one of the most intriguing questions in all of science. Some researchers are already proposing to drill hundreds of meters into the seabed to find out. NASA does not just send robots to the deep ocean, it sends people, too. Off Key Largo, in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, 62 feet below the surface, next to deep coral reefs, there is a structure called Aquarius. It is the world's only permanent undersea research station operated by Florida International University, and it serves as the centerpiece of a NASA program called NEMO, which stands for NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. During NEMO missions, groups of astronauts, engineers, and scientists live inside Aquarius for up to 3 weeks at a time. They are called aquanauts. And while they are down there, they simulate living on a spacecraft, test spacewalk techniques for future missions to asteroids, the Moon, and Mars, and run experiments that would be difficult or impossible to replicate on the surface. The logic is straightforward. The undersea world is hostile and alien, just like space. It requires extensive planning and sophisticated equipment. And through a technique called saturation diving, in which the human body becomes fully saturated with dissolved gas after 24 hours at any depth, the aquanauts can remain underwater for the duration of their mission. They can accurately predict exactly how much decompression time they need before returning to the surface, which limits the risk of decompression sickness. NASA uses the underwater environment to simulate different gravity conditions by adjusting the weighting on each aquanaut. The ocean floor becomes a stand-in for the surface of the Moon. For Mars, for the irregular terrain of a near-Earth asteroid, it is not a metaphor. It is a testing ground for the future of human exploration. Now we return to the mystery we started with. The oxygen that should not exist. After years of frustration and discarded sensors, Andrew Sweetman returned to the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in 2021 on a survey expedition. This time, his team used a different technique to measure oxygen, independent of the optode sensors they had used before. And once again, they saw the same impossible result. Oxygen levels inside the sealed chambers on the seafloor did not fall. They climbed. In 25 separate experiments, oxygen concentrations started at normal background levels and rose to between 200 and 819 micromoles per liter over roughly 47 hours. In some cases, more than 3 times the background concentration. Independent measurements using a completely different chemical method confirmed it. The sensors were not malfunctioning. This time, Sweetman did not throw the sensors away. He started investigating. The first hypothesis was biological. Maybe deep-sea microbes were producing the oxygen through some unknown metabolic pathway. Scientists had recently shown that certain microbes can generate what is called dark oxygen, oxygen produced without sunlight, so it was not an unreasonable guess. But when the team poisoned the seawater with mercury chloride to kill off the microorganisms, the oxygen levels still went up. The taxa, known to be capable of biological dark oxygen production, are killed by mercury chloride. Whatever was making this oxygen, it was not alive. The next hypothesis was radioactivity. The seafloor in the Clarion-Clipperton zone is covered in polymetallic nodules, lumps of mineral about the size of a potato, rich in manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper, and other metals. These nodules contain trace amounts of radioactive elements, and radioactive decay can decompose water molecules. But when the team modeled the contribution from radiolysis, it accounted for less than 0.5% of the oxygen they were observing. They also modeled the chemical reduction of manganese oxide at the temperatures and pressures found at the seafloor to see whether the nodules might be releasing oxygen through a straightforward chemical reaction. That, too, explained virtually nothing. So what was left? Then, in 2022, Sweetman was watching a video about deep-sea mining, and he heard someone describe the polymetallic nodules as a battery in a rock. It was a marketing metaphor, nothing more, but it made him think, what if the nodules actually were batteries? To understand why that question mattered, you need to know what polymetallic nodules actually are. They look like lumps of charcoal or misshapen potatoes. They sit scattered across the abyssal seafloor, sometimes densely packed, sometimes spread thin, and they grow incredibly slowly. A single nodule might take millions of years to reach the size of your fist. Layer by layer, metals precipitate from seawater and accumulate on the nodule surface. Manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper, iron, each layer slightly different in composition from the one before. These are not ordinary rocks. They are geological time capsules, and the layering creates something that, in electrochemical terms, looks a lot like a battery. Here is what the data suggests. When the researchers tested the electrical potential on the surface of 12 nodules from 3 different license areas in the Pacific, using platinum electrodes at 153 different sites on the nodule surfaces, they found voltage potentials of up to 0.95 volts. For comparison, a standard AA battery produces about 1.5 volts. Now, to split seawater into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis, you need a certain minimum voltage, roughly 1.23 volts, plus some additional energy to overcome resistance. That is more than any single nodule appears to produce on its own. But the voltage threshold can be lowered by several hundred millivolts if the reaction proceeds through a specific chemical pathway called the lattice oxygen-mediated mechanism, and if the nodule surfaces contain the right kind of metal catalysts, which is exactly what they have. Manganese oxides enriched with nickel, characterized by large internal tunnel structures and abundant defect sites, are known to optimize the adsorption of reactants and enhance conductivity and catalytic performance. So, the leading hypothesis is this: the polymetallic nodules on the seafloor of the Clarion-Clipperton zone may be functioning as natural geobatteries. The potential difference between the metal layers inside the nodules drives an internal redistribution of electrons, which, when the nodule surface is in contact with seawater, may be splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, rocks, making breathable air. In total darkness, 13,000 feet below the surface. The study, published in Nature Geoscience, found that dark oxygen production was correlated with the average surface area of the nodules. More surface area meant more oxygen. That is consistent with the geobattery hypothesis, because larger surface area means more potential electrochemical sites where the reaction can occur. But there are significant uncertainties, and the researchers themselves have been careful to label this as a hypothesis, not a confirmed mechanism. The oxygen production was not constant. In most experiments, it slowed and eventually stopped after about 2 days. Some researchers, including the study authors, believe this may be a bottle effect, where products build up and reactants are consumed inside the sealed chamber. In an open system on the natural seafloor, the reaction might be continuous. Others are more skeptical. Bo Barker-Jorgensen, a marine biogeochemist at the Max Planck Institute and one of the paper's peer reviewers, has expressed doubt that the nodules produce oxygen when they are left undisturbed. He acknowledges that the electrolysis appears to be real and that the observation is scientifically interesting, but the question of whether it happens naturally, without the disturbance of a lander, remains open. Some researchers have also suggested that the lander itself may have triggered the reaction by creating a bow wave that swept sediment off the nodule surfaces, exposing electrochemically active sites that are normally buried. If that is the case, it raises an urgent question. What would happen if deep-sea mining operations disturb those sediments on a massive scale? We do not know yet, and that honesty is important. If dark oxygen production is real, and if it happens naturally on the undisturbed seafloor, then we have discovered something that challenges one of the most fundamental assumptions in biology. For as long as we have understood photosynthesis, we have believed that all oxygen on Earth ultimately comes from living organisms using sunlight to split water. Plants, algae, cyanobacteria. That is the story we have told for generations. But these nodules are not alive. They are mineral deposits. And if they are producing oxygen, then the Earth has a source of breathable air that has nothing to do with life, nothing to do with the sun. As one researcher described it, this really strongly goes against what we traditionally think of as where oxygen is made and how it is made. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone stretches 4,500 miles across the eastern Pacific. It is littered with these nodules. They contain metals like cobalt, nickel, copper, lithium, and manganese, all critical elements used in the production of batteries for electric vehicles. 16 firms currently hold mining claims in the zone, and some estimates suggest there are enough nodules there to meet global demand for electric vehicle metals for decades. But half of the ecosystem's larger animals, the megafauna, are found only on the nodules. Fish, sea stars, organisms that live nowhere else on the planet. The nodules and surrounding sediment are a habitat for deep-sea life, from microbes to megafauna, a poorly understood ecosystem where most species have not even been discovered yet, let alone studied. And now, we know the nodules may also be an oxygen source for that life. The International Seabed Authority is still drafting rules and regulations for mining the deep sea. At least 32 member states have called for a moratorium, a precautionary pause, or an outright ban on deep-sea mining. The researchers say these findings add another layer of complexity to an already difficult decision. So what has NASA actually found at the bottom of the ocean? It has found ecosystems that survive without sunlight, powered by chemistry alone. It has found blind shrimp that feed on bacteria growing inside their own mouths, positioned at the razor edge between scalding vent fluid and frigid seawater. It has found microbes living in rock fractures 2.8 kilometers underground, sustained for tens of millions of years by the slow decay of radioactive elements, completely isolated from the world above. It has found eyeless iceworms burrowing into mounds of frozen methane, brine pools 5 times saltier than the sea, ringed by mussels that feed on bacterial chemistry. Tube worms, nourished by symbiotic bacteria that turn hydrogen sulfide into food. And it has found lumps of mineral on the abyssal seafloor that appear to produce oxygen without any involvement from life at all. It has tested navigation systems designed for Mars in the darkness of the deep Atlantic. It has sent astronauts to live underwater off Key Largo to rehearse for missions to the Moon and beyond. And it has built a fleet of small, autonomous submarines, guided by the same algorithms that landed Perseverance on the Red Planet, to explore the last great frontier on Earth as a dress rehearsal for exploring oceans on other worlds. The pressure at the bottom of Europa's ocean, beneath 7 miles of ice, is roughly the same as the pressure in the Hadal Zone. The darkness is the same. The isolation is the same. And if there is life on Europa, it will not be basking in sunlight. It will be clinging to a hydrothermal vent, or drifting through a chemical gradient, or buried in rock, drawing energy from reactions we might not even fully understand yet. One scientist on the Orpheus team put it simply: all you need is a warm core, And you get that from gravitational pull. The stretching and contracting cracks the seafloor. Fluid goes into those cracks and gets heated by the movements of the rock. Once you have rock, a heat source, and hot water, you can have microbial life. There is no reason why those habitats could not exist on Europa. We are not ready to go there. That technology is still decades away. But every time Orpheus descends into the deep, every time a lander seals off a patch of seafloor and watches the oxygen rise, every time a team of aquanauts runs a simulated spacewalk 60 feet below the Florida Keys, we get a little closer. The deep ocean is not just a place to study. It is a mirror, a preview, a test case for the most important question our species has ever asked. Is life unique to Earth? Or is it hiding everywhere we have not yet thought to look? For now, all we can do is keep looking. And the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. There is a biologist at Woods Hole who has spent his career studying the Hadal Zone. He has watched robots implode under the pressure. He has catalogued species that exist nowhere else on Earth. He has sent autonomous submarines into trenches so narrow that a wrong turn could mean losing the vehicle forever. And when asked what drives him, he does not talk about publications or funding or career milestones. He talks about questions. There are so many questions, he says. It is mind-boggling. And perhaps that is the most honest thing anyone has said about the deep ocean. We went down there looking for answers. We found questions instead. Better questions, harder questions. Questions that connect the bottom of our own ocean to the frozen moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to the ancient dried-up lakes of Mars, to the fundamental mystery of whether the universe is full of life or whether we are profoundly, cosmically alone. The plan, as one researcher described it, is to usher in a new era. And it is not just an era of discovery of science, but also of technology. The tools we build to explore the deepest places on Earth will become the ancestors of the tools we send to other worlds. The algorithms that navigate Orpheus through an undersea canyon will one day guide a probe beneath alien ice. Sometimes they come from looking down.